Last time on the Skip and Josh podcast.
How do you describe 2020? I mean, God.
First of all, I have to tell you that anything that happened before March 11th, it's not that I forgot that it happened. It's just that...
It's almost like it doesn't count.
No, it counts. It's just that I feel like it happened last year or 2 years ago or 3 years ago.
You're listening to the Skip and Josh podcast with Skip Sherman and Josh Obadia.
Okay, Skip, so today we're going to count down our favorite Team Canada hockey teams. But before we get to that, so speaking of hockey, the NHL season is supposed to start next week, assuming that there are enough players who don't test positive for COVID. I guess now would be an opportune time to do our NHL preview, which hopefully will last 30 seconds or less.
Well, I mean, we haven't done like a sports episode in a while, right? And well, I mean, do you like the new divisions that they came up with?
So I'm fine with the new divisions. I don't really care who plays in what division. But speaking of the divisions, what I wanted to say to you is, the more I look at it, I don't think the Montreal Canadiens are going to make the playoffs.
Well, I think it's a complete toss-up in that Canadian division, don't you think?
I don't think so, because I actually think, and again, this is my opinion, I think that Edmonton and Calgary and Vancouver and Winnipeg and Toronto are all better than Montreal.
I think that you're overrating Calgary, Edmonton, and Vancouver, and even Winnipeg, and underrating the Canadiens. So while I do think that those teams might all be slightly better, I think the gap is very, very close.
I don't know. Did you not see the last couple of 2-3 seasons? Calgary and Edmonton were both good.
Well, Edmonton's up and down all the time, and Calgary too. But yeah, no, it's going to be tough. The Canadian division is going to be I think it's completely up for grabs, honestly.
I think the best case scenario for Montreal is 4th place in that division, and that's even a stretch because Vancouver had a good season last year, and they're improving, and Winnipeg... They didn't have a good season last season, but 2 years ago they did, and their roster is pretty much the same.
Yeah, but when you say they're improving, don't you think that the Canadiens are the most improved team in that whole thing?
You know, they're improved, but speaking of improvements or changes to the roster, here's something that bothered me. Recently, obviously, they signed Corey Perry and Michael Frolik.
No, but I think as long as you have enough room under the salary cap, your depth should be as much as it can, given the COVID situation. I don't know if you're following the NBA, but the Philadelphia 76ers played a game today with 7 players.
Right. No, I agree with you on that. 100%. No. Don't get me wrong. But here's the other thing. Since you mentioned the salary cap, thank you for reminding me. I recall, was it just a year ago or 2 years ago when the Canadiens tried to sign Sebastian Aho and they didn't get him? Yeah, and when they didn't get him, they had all this cap room, which they didn't end up using. And now all of a sudden, today, they're like over the cap. How did that happen?
Yeah, they signed, what's his name, Anderson. They got Tyler Toffoli. They got a backup goalie who makes more than the one they had. There you go.
Right. But they're paying too much for that backup goalie, by the way.
Well, it's not my money.
No, it's not your money or mine. I know. But and they have, and if you include Carey Price, they have, what is it, 14 million total locked up in their goaltending position?
Yeah, they have a lot wrapped up in the goalies.
That's too much.
Yeah.
So, and I mean, the other guys you named that they signed, I think they're nice players, but I don't know.
But they're what I don't want to turn this into a Montreal Canadiens podcast, but they're the exact players that the Canadiens need. They're big. They're big bodies.
Okay.
Right? And they've addressed, for once in the last 20 years, the Canadiens actually made off-season moves that actually addressed their need, which is pretty rare. It's amazing that it never happened before, but it's finally kind of happened. I'm looking forward to hockey, and actually we had a taste of the World Juniors this past week, which was, obviously it didn't end in the way Canada wanted, but it was an exciting tournament and an exciting final game. So.
It was, yes. So one other thing before we get started, I want to mention to you, last Sunday, for the first time ever, I watched the NFL Red Zone, which I know you've been watching for years.
Red Zone is awesome. How did you like it?
Oh, Red Zone is awesome, and I did like it very much. But I want to ask you a question. There's no right or wrong answer to this. If you were going to describe the NFL Red Zone to someone who's never watched it before, and you could only say one thing, and you were going to say the best thing about the Red Zone, what would it be?
It shows you every single game going on at that time.
That is amazing, but that's like the third best thing about the red zone.
What's better than that? Yeah.
Okay, so that's the third best thing. The second best thing is that you don't have to sit and wait for them to snap the ball between plays. That is so annoying when you're watching just one game.
Yeah.
So that's the second best thing. And the best thing about it is
there's no commercials.
There's no commercials. That's the number one best thing about it.
I don't know how they get away with that.
I don't know how they get away with it either.
Yeah, it's really quite amazing because you just sit down and you just watch and there's no commercials and all you see is everything that's going on. And actually, let's say you had like, because most days, like when you're watching, let's say you're not watching Red Zone, you can get enough games on TV that you can switch between games yourself, right?
Right, but even still, you have to sit through commercials. You have to sit through, the play clock, which is running down.
But what I'm saying is that Red Zone makes all the decisions for you.
It's brilliant.
Like they tell you what you need to watch. They say this is going on right now. This is more important than what's going on in that game. So we're gonna go here, right? But it was weird that you actually watched Red Zone on the worst week because the last game of this, they have like a motto, like, and he says it all the time. He's like, "We promise we're gonna show you every touchdown from every game." So they were showing you what was going on in the Vikings game and in the games that were completely meaningless. They were still showing highlights of all that stuff because they kind of have to, right? Whereas I wanted them to just stay on like 2 games. I wanted them to just stay on the Cleveland game at one point, and they kept breaking away.
Actually, I think I watched it on the best week because there were more Sunday afternoon games this week than any other week during the season.
Well, that's true. That's true. Because normally when they have the morning, sometimes they are only showing you 6 or 7 games or not even, right? And here it's like we had everything because there was no Thursday, there was no Sunday night. Well, there was Sunday night.
There was no Monday, there was no Thursday. It was great.
Yeah, yeah. And actually the last few weeks we've had Saturday, so it's,
So anyway,
so that's good.
Now that I've watched it, if I ever watch football again, like during the regular season, that's the only thing I'm watching.
No. Once I don't know how it took me so long to get on to the Red Zone. Like I don't know why it took me this long. But once you start with the Red Zone, you can't go back. You cannot go back.
And like you said, I cannot believe that CBS and NBC and ABC and Fox allow this to happen.
Yeah. Because
who's now watching their network if you're watching
only
the Red Zone?
Only the diehards of the teams, right?
Right.
Like when the Eagles are on, we watch the Eagles. But when they're not on, we just watch Red Zone, So, yeah. And in all the commercials too. So that means we don't watch any commercials on the Eagles game. We just watch anyways. Yeah, we can go over and over. But yeah, Red Zone's good.
It's brilliant. Anyway, do you have any listener mail?
Mailbag.
I have 2 little items.
Okay.
A friend of the show, Derek.
Yeah.
Here in West Island, Montreal, mentioned to me that because it's funny because we talked so much about the show The Queen's Gambit, and we also mentioned, and then you also brought up Garry Kasparov, the chess champion. So he mentioned to me that he had read an article, and I'll have to try to find it, and I'll put it in the episode notes, the link, that the Queen's Gambit producers used Garry Kasparov as a consultant on the show to make the chess as realistic as possible.
Well, that's a smart idea. Like when they do sports movies, they always have like some sort of former player consulting them, telling them, no, this would never happen. Yeah.
Yeah. So Derek told me that it's an interesting article and it goes into detail about like when he first got on set and he first read the script and he was like, no. Because it was like the situation where like a player concedes the game or maybe like, I forget the circumstances, but basically Kasparov told the producers, at our level, we don't say check and we don't say checkmate. Like it's just like there's no word spoken. The piece goes down and then you leave.
It's understood.
Basically, it's understood. And so the other mail is from a friend of the show, Jesse Jackson, out in Dallas, Texas, who hosts the Set Lusting Bruce podcast that I was a guest on. He sent us an email, Josh, with some of the shows that his favorite shows of 2020. And actually, he said Better Call Saul would have been on his list, but he only considered shows that started, like that were originated this year, not like continuations. So he mentioned some shows that we mentioned, like The Queen's Gambit, but also Ted Lasso, which a lot of people had told me to watch. Star Trek Below Decks, which is a cartoon show that I really did not enjoy, and the movie The Trial of Chicago 7, which is on Netflix. I think I'll watch it. But what was interesting, in his honorable mentions, he had Zoe's Extraordinary Playlist. And I don't think Jesse listened to our show going far back enough to know that we talked about Zoe's Extraordinary Playlist so many times, right? And actually, season 2 started this week, so that's kind of interesting, no?
Yeah, no, very interesting. And yes, I did watch the season premiere on, I think it was Tuesday or Wednesday. I've lost track of the days now.
I think it was Tuesday, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm up to date on
I didn't like
show.
the season premiere very much at all.
It was, yeah, it was nothing special.
It was a lot. It was much too, like, sad and serious.
Yeah, like the last episode from last season.
Yeah. Maybe they're trying to do that on purpose because, like, you're the one that mentioned to me, they lead it into This Is Us. So, just like, you remember, NBC used to have like the Thursday night lineup with all the sitcoms like one after each other, like Cheers, Night Court, Seinfeld, whatever they were,
the
right?
Cosby Show.
Exactly, whatever.
Friends.
Like there was always like one Friends, exactly, one sitcom after another. So maybe they're trying to make this like the serious emotional night. I don't know.
It's the Zoe's Extraordinary Playlist is certainly in a better time slot this year. Tuesday night is much better than Sunday.
It was Sunday. Yeah, Sunday is the time slot that networks usually put on shows when they're not sure about them and they want to test them, and they just throw them. They're like, okay, we'll give you Sunday night.
Right.
Yeah. All right. So we didn't talk about it last time, but over the course of the last few weeks, we did choose a topic. You asked me for a topic and I gave you one, which was our favorite Team Canada hockey teams. So we decided we're going to go back and look at Canada's international hockey teams over the course of our lifetimes and pick our favorite teams, and women, men, both women's and men's teams. So it encompasses mostly Olympics, but Canada Cup, it could have the World Hockey Championships, the World Junior Championships. I think I got them all, right? Is that it?
Yeah, the only one you didn't mention is World Cup, because I know you don't count that as anything.
Well, do you have a favorite Team Canada that was in the World Cup in your list?
No, I don't, but you could have put one.
You could have, yeah, you could have. So I really only had 6 in my list, and then you told me you had 7, so I'm going to move up one of my honorable mentions into the 7th spot, if that's okay.
That's totally okay. And anyway, you have to go first because it's your list, so go ahead.
So you have no honorable mentions, but I'll give you 2 honorable mentions because I had 3 originally. So one of them is the women's Olympic hockey team from 2010 in Vancouver. Now, I do have another women's team in the list, but this one could have easily made it. It just didn't. I just remember like how because the Olympics was in Vancouver, the whole country was so wrapped up in the Olympics, especially the men's and the women's hockey teams. So it was kind of a great time to be a Canadian hockey fan in 2010 around the Olympic time. And then the other team that I had here, I wish I was a hockey fan at the time when this tournament existed. And when I say favorite, I'm going completely by articles and video and news and not actual memories, but just what I've read, which is the 1976 Canada Cup team. I don't know how much you know about that. That was the first year that they decided to do the Canada Cup, and it was Canada defeated Czechoslovakia, not the Czech Republic, in the final, because they had a round robin type of format. Canada, there wasn't like a final. It was just like they just won. But I don't know. Do you know anything about this team or not?
I don't know anything about that team. I thought you were going to say 1972, but I don't know anything about 76 either.
72 we can get to in a sec, but I mean the 76 team is maybe the greatest hockey team ever assembled. Like, it's literally almost every player I'm going to tell you is in the Hall of Fame, like on this team. Bill Barber, Bobby Clark, Marcel Dion, Phil Esposito, Bob Gainey, Bobby Hull, Guy Lafleur, Guy Lapointe, Richard Martin, Pete Mahovlich, Lanny McDonald, Bobby Orr, Gilbert Perreault, Dennis Potvin, Larry Robinson, Serge Savard, Steve Shutt, Daryl Sittler, and the coach was Scotty Bowman. So,
sorry, did you name the goalies? Who are the goalies?
The goalies are the weak spot, but I mean, when you have this team in front of it, the goalies were Jerry Cheevers and Chico Resch and Rogie Vachon.
Actually, those are good goalies.
Actually, they're fine, but like they're not like, we're not talking about like the greatest goalies in history compared to like their team that I just told you.
Right,
you know?
right.
So anyways, so that's my honorable mention, only because I don't really remember it other than seeing posters when I was a little kid.
Okay, great.
So then we'll start with my number 7. Yeah,
go ahead.
Number 7.
we're fresh off of the World Junior Hockey Championship. As we mentioned, Canada just lost. It was funny because some people were saying at the beginning of this tournament that Canada was definitely the strongest team and they thought they were going to dominate and win the gold and even go undefeated. And they almost did go undefeated until the final game, right? Until the United States beat them, and deservingly. But so my number 7 is actually the 2005 World Junior Hockey Championship team. I don't know how much you remember about the 2005 team.
You're going to have to refresh my memory because I don't. Okay. I know that was one of the years that Canada won 5 years in a row or something, right?
It's the first year of the 5 years in a row. Okay. But it's by far the strongest team Canada ever fielded. And that's because there was the lockout in the NHL.
Oh,
so
yes.
Any player who was eligible that might have been in the NHL, just being drafted, was on this team, right? So you're talking about, I'm not going to read you the whole team, but like Brett Seabrook, Dion Phaneuf, Shea Weber, Jeff Carter, Sidney Crosby, Ryan Getzlaf, Mike Richards, Andrew Ladd, Corey Perry, Patrice Bergeron. That's nuts.
Yes,
right?
It is. Who were you left out the goalies again.
The goalie was look, Team Canada in the World Juniors does not have a strong history of goalies. They just don't. Jeff Glass was the goalie, believe it or not.
Oh, yes. I remember that, actually.
No one even knows who that is.
I do know who he is.
Yeah. So, that, I put that team as my number 7 just because I remember it. And I remember just, because of the lockout, so much was focused on the World Juniors. And this team was so strong, and they went end to end. And what you don't remember, what was the big deal is it was Russia versus Canada at the end, and it was Ovechkin who was on Russia, right? Because Crosby was on Canada.
Oh, of course, yes.
And they basically took him out. When I say took him out, they injured him in the first period, and Canada went on to win the game by a big score. I forget what it was. It wasn't even close. So
okay.
So that's my number 7.
Perfect. Number 7 for me, we go to the 2002 Olympics in Salt Lake City. The Canadian women's hockey team defeated USA, and it was, if you recall, it was quite a heated affair, that game. It wasn't like, they didn't come from behind, and it didn't go into overtime, so it wasn't, dramatic that way. But neither of these teams, those players do not like each other.
Oh, they hated each other.
Yes, they did.
Look, I'm going to tell you full disclosure. This game is in my list, so I do have a lot to say about it, but since your pick, I'll let you lead the way.
Oh, no, I don't have much to say about it other than... it was a very heated affair, and you could see, when Canada scored the winning goal. It wasn't like it was a tie game, or I think Canada had the lead the entire time in that game, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, that was the game, Josh, with the 11 power plays.
Right, because the ref was just ridiculous.
Yeah, there was 11 power plays in a row for the United States, and somehow Canada weathered the storm and eventually scored the winning goal after that.
Right. So anyway, that's number 7 for me.
Good pick. And obviously it's a good pick. It's in my list. You'll see.
Number 6.
Number 6 for me. Now, look, if I told you that the 76 Canada Cup, I have no memory because I was 6 years old. Obviously, the 72 Summit Series, I was 2 years old. So, but yet I still am putting it as number 6 on my list because, anybody who lives in Canada, I don't care how old you are, even my son, who's, think about how old 1972 is for him, knows about the Summit Series, right? Because it's in books and it's in movies and it's on highlights and it's on TV and it's on every top 10 list, and it's the most iconic hockey series probably ever played. So I put Team Canada there. Now, look, obviously, we know what happened. Paul Henderson scored that goal in the 8th game. They played 4 games here in Canada, and then they went to Russia to play 4 games. And it's interesting. We could do a whole episode about this series, but you know what you always say about softball when we used to play softball and you were trying to make the lineup and you say we had too many guys, right? Mm-hmm. So Canada had too many guys, right? Because they took Russia lightly, and they thought we're going to turn this. We're just going to pick everybody and anybody who's a sort of a star and invite this huge roster. But then once they started to get their butts kicked and realized that they were going to lose, then they started to hone in on their best lineup and actually start playing hard. And then it was a series. So
just to let you know, this game this team is not on my list because I didn't see any of it, of course. And so I only included teams that I actually saw with my own eyes.
Well, I mean, that's fair. I mean, look, we always have nuances in terms of like how we decide what's on our list. So I realized that I was only 2 years old and we're calling it favorites, so it's a bit weird. Okay,
so number 6 for me, we go to the 2014 Olympics in Sochi. And again, the Canadian women defeated USA. Now, this particular game was extremely dramatic because with 3.5 minutes left in the game, Canada was down 2-0. And then
I remember this.
And then finally, Marie-Philippe Poulin scores the tying goal with 55 seconds left in the third period. They had pulled the goalie. Canada had pulled their goalie. Now, 30 seconds before she tied it up, USA had cleared the puck and it was rolling and it looked like it was about to go into the empty Canada net. But the goalpost made the biggest save of the tournament, if you recall.
I remember it so well.
Yeah. And so, in fact, if you go to the Canadian Olympic Committee website, they have profiles of current and former Olympians. The goalpost has its own profile.
Oh, that's amazing.
So I can send you the link to that later. So anyway, so the hero of the game was the goalpost. But then the game goes into overtime. And again, Marie-Philippe Poulin scores the winner in overtime. And so that was a very exciting game to watch.
You know, most people consider Hayley Wickenheiser the greatest Canadian women's hockey player, and she probably is. But Marie-Philippe Poulin is right there. I mean, she's right there.
I agree.
Number 5.
My number 5 is a team that you already mentioned. Sorry, that's the 2002 Salt Lake Olympic team of the women's team. The game that we just talked to, where the U.S. had 11 power plays and Canada managed to, win the game. And I don't have much more to say than what we already said. Other than that, the reason why it was so heated, I mean, these were the only two teams that were good at this time. Now, some of the other teams have caught up a little bit, right, in women's hockey. But back then, the U.S. and Canada would meet in every single world championship every single year, and all those players played against each other, and they all hated each other. And then if you remember, the United States actually won the gold medal in Nagano 4 years prior. And there was this incident, now the United States denies it, that they were stomping on the Canadian flag in the dressing room, prior to or after the gold medal win. So, United States has always denied that happened, but it fueled Canada. I think that's like all part of the rivalry, and and that made the win in 2002 much more sweet. And what's interesting is that the 2002, we're talking about like the pioneers of women's hockey, right? So like Hayley Wickenheiser, who I already mentioned, and Caroline Ouellette, who represented Canada so many times. And then in the United States, you had Cammy Granato, who was like basically like the mother of USA women's hockey, in terms of where it all started, and actually someone that we've met before.
Well, speaking of Cammy Granato, I remember when I was a student at Concordia, I went to use, there's like a lab where you could just use a computer to check your email back then. Yeah. And I'm in the room checking my email, and who's sitting right next to me? Cammy Granato. She's checking her email.
But I remember going to a game of Concordia hockey, right?
Yeah.
So, were you with me? You must have been.
I think I was with you because
I remember going to game. I remember going to at least one game specifically, like a Concordia Stingers hockey game, and sitting there and like there's hardly anybody watching. And then who's there? Like Cammy Granato and her friends from the women's hockey team, and we were talking to her, and actually she was really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She was just another Concordia student.
She's just another student, just like us.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So it was kind of cool to see her in the Olympics, although we always knew she would be. So just goes to show that at that time, this was in the 90s, right? The best American women's hockey player of all time had to come to like a Canadian university to play hockey, right? Think about that.
Yes, things have changed now.
Yeah.
College hockey, women's college hockey is much better in the United States now.
Yeah.
In fact,
well,
the good Canadian women go to the United States to play now. That's how much better it is now.
Well, there's so much money in college sports in the United States compared to Canada, right?
Well, the players don't get paid, or at least
no, but just the infrastructures of the universities and the money they have for facilities and coaching and training and
Right. Number 5 for me is the 2009 World Junior Hockey Championships in Ottawa. So there are a few reasons why I picked this team. One of them is because you and I and your son actually saw them play live in a game, which was not a close game at all. I think it was a 15-0 blowout against Kazakhstan.
It was.
But more importantly, if you remember back to this tournament, I believe it was the semi-final game where Canada was playing Russia, and Canada was down in the third period with 5 seconds left, and it looked like the game was over. And somehow Canada keeps the puck in the zone, and it ends up bouncing to Jordan Eberle, who is like right in front of the net, and he scores to tie up the game in the third period.
Right.
This is after Canada had pulled Dustin Tokarski for an extra skater. And then the game goes into overtime, no one scores, and then Jordan Eberle scores the game-winning goal in the shootout. So
I mean, Jordan Eberle is like the greatest Canadian junior player, I think, ever. And maybe not in terms of total points and whatever, but like if you talk about clutchness, it's absurd.
For
like,
sure.
What this guy did for Canada.
For sure.
So, Josh, this is my number 4.
Number 4.
This was my next one that I was going to talk about. This is my number 4 on my list.
Okay, so go ahead and
World
talk
Junior
about it.
Yeah, World Junior Championships 2009. Look, I wrote, this is what I have in my notes. Famous semifinal versus Russia, Jordan Eberle. And actually, TSN pretty much bases their entire marketing campaign every year since around this tournament based on Gordon Miller's call of that goal by Jordan Eberle when he says, "Can you believe it?" Like, it's in every single commercial that TSN has put out since 2009.
20 seconds to go in the third. Hodgson. Filatov picks it up. Filatov with time to the line. Ellis knocks it down. They battle on the wall for it. Ellis in there as well. Boychuk looking for it. Tavares pulls it out. Tavares backhand towards the goal. Loose puck. Eberle scores! Tie game! Can you believe it?
Well, it's so exciting, and it's like so memorable. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, I've watched the junior tournament for I don't know how many years. If you ask me to tell you about 2005, 6, 7, 8, there's nothing I can remember. But 2009, I remember.
Well, you just said to me, didn't we win 5 years in a row? And I was like, yeah, only because I just looked it up today. But this is part of that, you know? So other than Jordan Eberle, we can move on to your number 4 in a second. But other than Jordan Eberle, like the famous, well-known players that were on this team, Ryan Ellis, Tyler Myers, Alex Pietrangelo, PK Subban, and then of course at forwards you have Jamie Benn, Jordan Eberle, Cody Hodgson, who never had a great NHL career but was a fantastic junior player, Evander Kane, and then of course John Tavares, who was actually the real big star, you know, of the team. Tavares is the one who kept the puck in at the blue line. You know, that play with Eberle is Russia had a chance to ice the puck and probably just kill the puck, kill the game, and end the game. But one of their players decided to take a crack at the empty net and then missed, and then it became icing. So that's how Canada got a face-off in the Russia zone. And then scramble draw, and Tavares is the one who actually keeps it in at the blue line, and then it just goes right to Eberle for the goal.
And once again, the goaltenders on Team Canada were very, ordinary goalies.
Oh, and if you go through the history of World Junior Canada, like when they did have really good goalies, those goalies tended to sometimes melt down, like Marc-Andre Fleury. Right? Marc-Andre Fleury did not have a great ending to his junior career for Canada, even though he had a stellar career in the NHL.
Yeah, the only exception to that is Carey Price.
Yeah, well, Carey Price for sure. I mean, they won, and he was the big star, especially in the shootout against the United States. So, anyways, I don't know if that game's on your list, but anyways.
So, we're at number 4 now. Well, you just did number 4. So my number 4 is the 2010 Olympics in Vancouver.
And we're right on the money, Josh, because that's my number 3.
Well, I'm referring to the men's team here.
No, me too.
And so the reason I'm picking this, a couple of reasons. First of all, because the Olympics were in Canada, so that's a pretty cool thing to begin with. And then also because that final game, it's a close game, late in the third period, USA ties it up. And I'm watching this game at your house with you and Book, and your son was born at that point.
He was 9 years old. He was following hockey, He was playing hockey. He was following hockey. Crosby was his favorite player. Like, this was a big deal for him. This is probably the first big deal in his life in terms of hockey.
Right. So that's what made it even more exciting because we were all together watching.
Yeah.
And then when Canada blew the lead late in the third period,
God.
During the intermission, I'm thinking the worst, right? Like, now they have the momentum, and I was not looking forward to the overtime at all.
Yeah.
But then luckily, Canada has a guy named Sidney Crosby and another guy named Jerome McGinley.
Yeah.
And, well, I don't need to tell you what happened in the overtime.
Sidney Crosby can't bust in. Up with it again. He's on the ice with McGinley. Crosby! Sidney Crosby! The golden goal!
So, like I said, this is my number 3.
Number 3.
This is like, if we're going next and it's my number 3, well, 2010 Vancouver Olympics, Team Canada men. The golden goal game. I mean, it was interesting, right? Because it seemed like USA and Canada, again, were on a collision course for the gold medal game, right? It seemed like inevitable that they were going to meet in the final game, and then they did. And like you said, like, I thought we blew it, and then next thing you know, McGinley's passing it to Crosby, and I mean, it was Crosby's time, right? And it just seemed like so fitting that he's the one to get that. Well, I mean, just like I said 2 minutes ago, that Gord Miller's call of like, can you believe it, for Jordan Eberle at the World Juniors, the call of Chris Cuthbert with the golden goal. I mean, that is also like, in this country, it's totally iconic. No, like, it's unreal.
100%.
Yeah, and I don't know if you remember, but like, Luongo was the goalie, right?
Oh, yeah. No, I do remember.
Yeah, he's just like sometimes a forgotten man when it comes to Team Canada goalies. And I mean, obviously, we had a loaded team with Crosby, McGinley, you mentioned, but Jonathan Toews, Ryan Getzlaf, Eric Stahl, and then our D was always so strong in the international tournaments, with Pronger, Niedermeyer, and then Doughty, Duncan Keith, and then of course Shea Weber. Do you remember the shot that Shea Weber took that went through the net earlier on the tournament?
Now that you mention it, yes, but
it wasn't in this game, but
it
wasn't in that golden goal game, but it was earlier in the tournament, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, leave it to Shea Weber to rip a hole in the net.
Yeah. So that was my number 3. So now we're on your number 3, and I think we're going to have the same 1s and 2s.
Maybe, I don't know.
We have to. Like, anyways, continue. But
so number 3 for me is the 2002 Olympics in Salt Lake City.
It's crazy because the last 3 things now, my next one is the same one that you have.
So now again, here I'm referring to the men's team. And so the reason I'm picking this team is because a couple of reasons. First of all, Wayne Gretzky was the general manager, and Wayne Gretzky actually never won an Olympic gold medal.
Right. The coaches and the management don't get the medal in the Olympics.
Right. I don't know if Gretzky won any Olympic medal at all. So with all the awards that he's won and all the scoring titles that he has in the NHL and all the records that he broke, he never had an Olympic medal. So the fact that he was the GM for this team, that's one reason why I'm picking this team. But the other reason I'm picking this game is because this was the first time that Canada had won a gold medal in hockey at the Olympics since 1952. So literally 50 years.
Amazing, right? Yeah.
So it's kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
Number 2.
So look, like we're going to move on to me, which for my number 2, and that's this. 2002 Salt Lake City Team Canada men. Just like the women were looking for redemption from losing in 98, so were Team Canada men, right? I mean, 98 was the low point of Canada hockey, like for me as a fan and maybe for Canada hockey as an organization. And they actually have a lot to be proud of in 98 because they actually played great in the tournament and actually played great in that game against Dominik Hasek, but they lost to Dominik Hasek, basically, right?
Well, they couldn't score.
But they couldn't score. But they played amazing. They really, really played well and deserved better, but that's how hockey goes sometimes. And the 2002 team is sort of the opposite because I don't know if you remember, they got killed by Sweden in the first game, right? Of this tournament in 2002.
Right.
And,
well, they used they didn't use the same goalie after that.
Well, that's it. Curtis Joseph played against Sweden, and then after that, Martin Brodeur took over and didn't look back. But Canada was only 1-1-1 after the group stage. And then they had to play Finland in the quarterfinals. They snuck by 2-1. But then I don't know if you remember. Well, I'm sure you do remember. But they were on scheduled to play Sweden in the semifinals, and I was not optimistic based on what happened in the first game. But Sweden lost to Belarus in their quarterfinal. Or if you remember that famous Sami Salo, who was the goalie for Tommy Salo?
Tommy
right?
Salo.
he gave up that like goal that went over his shoulder.
It was a shot from center ice or something.
Yeah, against Belarus. And then so we had to play Belarus in the semifinal instead of Sweden, which of course we killed them. And then the final game against the United States, which we actually won fairly easily 5-2. So, I mean, the cool thing about this Team Canada team, which most Team Canadas didn't have, is it was really a mix of old and young, right? Because you had like the elder statesmen like Yzerman and then Mario Lemieux, right? Mario Lemieux. Like,
he was the captain.
Yeah. So you had Mario and Yzerman and other veterans like McInnes and Correa and Rob Blake and Niedermeyer. Like, it was really like quite a team. And then you had these young guys. I don't know if you remember how good he was at the time, but Simon Gagné, who represented Canada very well in many tournaments.
I do recall,
and then
yes.
Yeah. And then, of course, Jerome McGinley, who at this point in 2002 was a young player who, you know, like very young player, you know, so it was a great team and a fun time, you know, just really, really good.
So if that's your number 2, then obviously we don't have the same 1 and 2.
No, we don't. I'm curious to know what your 1 and 2 is.
Okay. So number 2 for me, and maybe this didn't even make it onto your list, who knows, is the 1991 Canada Cup. And this is the tournament where I actually went to a few games.
Yeah, this didn't make it onto my list. This didn't make it onto my list, which means we have the same number 1. I'm fairly certain.
Okay. So a bunch of games
we talked about
in
this
Montreal.
team recently, right? This is the Steve Larmer team, right?
Yeah. And this is the team where Wayne Gretzky got injured in the first game against the United States.
Yeah.
And so he didn't play in the second game against the United States in the final, because the final was like a best of 3 back then.
Yeah.
And so he didn't. And I was at the game where Gretzky got injured.
It was, what's his name? Suter.
Garry
right?
Suter. Yes. Garry Suter in the corner. So, I mean, it wasn't a dramatic tournament, if you will. Canada won the tournament 2-0 in that best of 3.
Yeah.
But still, it was pretty exciting for me because I got to go to a few games.
Right. The 91, that 91 team is interesting, right? Because it wasn't the most talented team, especially after Gretzky got injured. And even then, Gretzky was older, right?
Yeah. So, you know, just very exciting for me because, you know, of course I was younger then. So when you're younger, everything is more exciting. And the fact that I got to go to a few games was exciting.
Yeah.
And I got to see Canada beat the United States in one of the 2 games.
That's amazing. Great. I wrote down, I mean, look, doing my research for this, what I did is like, I looked up every Team Canada that won the Olympics, every Team Canada that won the World Juniors, every Team Canada that won the Canada Cup, made a whole list. And then I, you know, sort of ranked them. But I had that one on the short list, but then I had erased it at one point.
Number 1.
Yeah, I guess we have the same number 1, which is something that we did talk about this year, which was the 87 Canada Cup, right?
Okay, well then we don't have the same number 1.
So are you telling me the 87 Canada Cup is not on your list?
It's not on my list.
It's amazing that my number 1 is not on your list and vice versa. So anyways, 87 Canada Cup, we talked about it this year because they showed it, you know, when there was no sports going on back.
Oh, yes, I remember now. Of course, yes, I do. It was a best of 3 against the Russians. Yes.
Yeah. When there was no sports going on, they showed the 87 Canada Cup on TV because they had no sports to show, right? So TSN or Sportsnet was replaying this, and so best of 3 against the Russians. Every game was 6-5. It went to game 3, and then of course everyone knows how it ends with, you know, Gretzky passing to Lemieux for the winning goal. And it's also, like I've said, how many iconic, I mentioned Gordon Miller and I mentioned Chris Cuthbert, but and then the call in the 87 Canada Cup, which is probably
Dan Kelly.
Howard wins it in. Here's Lemieux poking at the center. Lemieux ahead to Gretzky. Has Murphy with him on a 2-on-1 to Lemieux. And on goal. He shoots. He scores! Mario Lemieux!
That was like you said, when you're a teenager, everything's more important, right? So I was 17 years old. I followed every game, watched every game. It was like, it was do or die. It was like, it's all you cared about was like, what was Canada going to do? And of course the team was really loaded. And when I just mentioned Gretzky and Lemieux, but you know, we're talking about Dale Hawerchuk, Mark Messier, Paul Coffey, and then, you know, Grant Fuhrer was in nets, and Ray Bourque and Larry Murphy, Hall of Famers. It's like quite an amazing team. So.
Yeah, so now that you mention it, I should have put this in my list. I wouldn't have put it at number 1 because I wouldn't change my number 1, and I'll tell you what it is in a second. I should have had it in my top 7. I guess that means I would have to eliminate number 7.
Right, okay. So I can't wait to hear what your number 1 is, because like...
So my number 1 is the 1984 Canada Cup. Now,
okay, that's That's the one with John Tonelli.
Yes. So
Right.
let me just to refresh everyone's memory. So this was crazy exciting because first of all, going into this final game, Canada versus, I think they were called Soviet Union at the time. I'm not even sure. Going into this final game, the Soviets were way better than Canada in this tournament. It wasn't even close. Canada really should have lost because going into it, Canada, I think, only had like a 500 record in the round robin preliminary round. So then you get to this game, and it was a very close game. It ends up going into overtime. So now once you get to overtime, anything can happen, right?
Right.
So with, I think, 12 minutes left in overtime or something like that, the Russians have a 2-on-1 break. And who is the defenseman that is the only one back for Canada? It's Paul Coffey, who, by the way, wasn't exactly known for his defense.
Right.
But somehow he breaks up the 2-on-1 with an amazing defensive play. Then he takes the puck up ice, he gets it into the Russian zone, and he gets it deep. And then John Tonelli basically takes over because John Tonelli did so much work on this play. It was, I don't even know if he got an assist or credit for an assist, maybe not. But he does so much work because he takes down 2 Russians on his own behind the net. The puck stays in the zone. It somehow comes back to John Tonelli in the corner. He gets the puck back to Paul Coffey, who takes a shot, and Mike Bossy unknowingly deflects it into the net, and Canada wins. So Mike Bossy gets credit for the goal. Paul Coffey took the shot, but John Tonelli did all the work, and John Tonelli ended up being the tournament MVP of that tournament.
Out come the Soviets on a 2-on-1. Only Coffey is back. Over the line, Coburn and Coffey! Great defensive play in Canada in transition. Back they come. To the line. Coffey dropped it off. Here's Tonelli moving in. Tonelli to the boards. Around behind the net for Sutter. Sutter clears it out in front. Went off a leg. Now Tonelli doing all that work again, and he takes 2 players down with him. Back out to the blue line. Coffey takes the shot. Turns with it. Fires it in there. Deflects over top of the net. Tonelli after that puck. Tonelli ducks the check. Back out the blue line. Here's another shot.
This is the tournament that opened my eyes about actual hockey because we're 14 years old at this time, right? So you look at the scoring leaders, you pick your favorite players based on who's got the most goals and most assists and all that stuff, and who's the fastest and the most skilled. But this is when I realized that actually in hockey, sometimes hard work and being tenacious is what makes you win, right?
Absolutely. And I mean, being, at the time I was a Canadiens fan, so I was not an Islanders fan.
Right.
So I didn't like guys like John Tonelli and Mike Bossy, who, by the way, were playing on the same line.
Yeah.
But when they were playing for Canada, I loved them.
Yeah. I just remember after this tournament, people saying how John Tonelli was the best player in the world. And I was like, are you kidding me? But I mean, if anybody who watched this tournament, he was the best player in the world for 2 weeks. That's for sure. That's
for sure. For this tournament, he was the best player and he deserved the MVP.
Good pick, Josh. I mean, I could have put it on my list, but I didn't remember.
By the way, Wayne Gretzky was on this team and I didn't even mention him at all.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah. That's right. Amazing. Lots of good memories, no? So do you think that we'll ever see Canadian NHL players in the Olympics?
Well, it looks like they're going to be in the next Winter Olympics from what I've heard.
Yeah, I think the players want it badly enough, right?
Yeah, listen, I think everyone wants it. Certainly the IOC wants it. Certainly the players want it. And as long as the NHL gets paid, they'll want it too.
That's exactly. You hit the nail on the head. As long as they get paid, they'll want it. They'll want it too. That's a perfect thing. That's so perfect.
The Skip and Josh podcast is available wherever you listen to podcasts, including Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. If you listen to the show through Apple Podcasts, please leave a review. To interact with the show, send an email to skipandjoshshow@gmail.com. Follow the show on Twitter @skipandjosh, and go to facebook.com/skipandjosh to like the show page. To see links mentioned on today's episode, go to skipandjosh.com. And now for some final thoughts from the guys.
All right, so Josh, you told me you had 6 million things that you wanted to end the show with. Which one did you pick?
I just want to correct myself, and it's not so much a correction, but not in our previous episode, but 2 episodes ago, I mentioned, we were talking about ice cream, and I mentioned a place called Ripple's Ice Cream on Saint Laurent Boulevard in Montreal, across the street from Schwartz's.
Yeah.
Well, I was recently at Schwartz's. I didn't eat in the restaurant. I took it home. And when I looked across the street, Ripple's is unfortunately closed now.
I wonder if it's a victim of COVID or just, I don't know.
Or maybe because it's winter and no one buys ice cream. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you would still see it there, just
right,
close for the season. But
it was there 6 months ago in the summer. It was there, but 2 weeks ago when I was there, it was no longer there.
All right. Well, next time I go down there, I'm going to check it out. 2 little notes, and you don't have to comment on them, just to end the show with. Congratulations to the Buffalo Bills, who won their first playoff game in 25 years, just shortly before we hit record here, which is pretty great. I mean, there's so many Bills fans in where you live in Toronto, and even in Montreal. Like, there's Bills fans everywhere. So I'm glad
tons.
Yeah, I'm glad they were able to get that win. And then, of course, condolences. I mean, not that I know them, but sad to hear the news that Tommy Lasorda passed away. 93 years old. I mean, anybody who's ever followed the Los Angeles Dodgers knows Tommy Lasorda, and anybody who followed baseball in the 70s, 80s, 90s knows him well. Especially, he has a big, strong connection with Montreal. You know, he pitched here for the Montreal Royals when they were the farm team of the Dodgers, and he's famous for getting Youppi thrown out of that game in that long 22-inning game against the Dodgers.
That's the first thing I thought about when I heard it. When I heard that he died, the first thing I thought about was, he got Youppi ejected from a game.
Yeah, and what I didn't know, Mitch Melnick mentioned it on the radio here yesterday. Apparently, there was strong rumors in the 70s that Tommy Lasorda was going to be the manager of the Expos.
I didn't know that.
And then he didn't take it, and then they made him the manager of the Dodgers, so he kind of took the better job, you know, or from his perspective, the job he wanted more. So,
I mean, the Expos weren't good in the 70s, so I don't know.
No,
if
it was the early 70s before they were good, you know, like
right.
Yeah. Because by the time the Expos were good, Lasorda was the manager. I mean, I don't know who the manager of the Dodgers was before Lasorda. I could not tell you right now.
I think it was Walter Alston.
Think about how old that is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, what are we doing next week?
Oh, right. I have to pick a topic now.
Yeah.
Way to put me on the spot.
Well, I gave you a tough one this week. We did a lot of research to come up with these Team Canada
Okay,
things.
so I've made a list. Like, I made a list months ago, and I have about 10 different things. I mean, I don't like 9 of them. But I do have a list, so I'm going to pick one now.
Okay.
You're either going to really, really hate this, or you're either going to really, really like it. I don't know.
All right, let's hear it.
Favorite Bruce Springsteen songs?
Oh, come on.
Well, you can only pick 7.
Only 7. Okay,
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's going to be interesting because this is going to be interesting because we're going to have like the casual fan and the hardcore fan. So the list could be completely different.
I expect them to be completely different.
And the perspective of where we're coming from on these, like I don't know how well you know like Bruce's whole catalog, you know?
I don't.
You don't. I know you. I mean, I know which songs you know and which ones you don't know. So there's a real strong chance that there's going to be songs that I'm going to name that you're going to be like, oh, I don't know that one.
I imagine that all 7 of yours are going to be songs I don't know.
No, come on.
They could be.
No. Obviously, you've heard of Born to Run.
Of course I've heard of it, yes.
I know, I'm joking, but like that, I can tell you right now that's on the list. So
okay.
You know. All right. Well, it was a pleasure talking about hockey with Canada, Team Canada's.
Yes, it was.
It was timely, you know, with hockey starting up. So I figured this is a good time to get back into thinking about hockey. And it's always a good time to talk about Bruce Springsteen. So that'll be next week.
That's right.
I'll talk to you next week.
Okay. Have a good week.